Hello. I have a cough, but I am way past contagious. This is like week 3. So if I cough partway through, don't panic. Okay, don't everybody exit through the fire escape. I'm absolutely fine. I'm just going to tip this back a little bit, if I may. Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks to the meetup organisers and to Mantel Group for hosting and providing me with some pizza. Chris, I think, saw my talk. This talk, it's largely the same talk at a conference up in Sydney a few weeks ago, and asked me if I could come along and share as well. This is not a talk about domain-driven design. I'll just be really upfront about that. This is a talk about kind of managing technology in a mid-sized product company. But I think there's some linkage, and I think there's some kind of references to those sort of things. And I do talk about it in terms of domain-driven architecture. A little bit about me. The random photo is because my son's 20 and special needs. He and I ride a tandem bicycle. I'd just like to leave like a little bit of trivia whenever I give a talk. The person on the front of a tandem is called the captain, and the person on the back of the tandem is called the stoker. It's got absolutely nothing to do with the talk, and maybe I could make some weird link to the ubiquitous language of tandem bicycle riding, and within that bounded context, those things are meaningful. I just kind of like the terms, and it's a real hoot riding around on the gravel roads up in central Victoria. If I'm not talking loud enough to be picked up, can someone yell? I have a famously quiet voice. I'll try and talk louder. Okay, lovely. So me, my current role I work for the product company MYOB. We build accounting software or a business management platform, if you want to be fancy about it. I've been there for nearly 2 years. Before I've been at MYOB, I was at a consultancy called ThoughtWorks for about 15 years, which kind of still freaks me out that I was there for so long. I kind of I'd never had a job longer than about a year before that. And in that time, I'm just going to see if I can. I think it's good. I had the pleasure of working as kind of a tech lead and hands-on developer, app developer, everything from data platforms to cloud and infrastructure, all these sort of things. In the last 10 years, I was able to be part of the ThoughtWorks Global Tech Advisory Board and put together a thing called the ThoughtWorks Technology Radar, and go and hang out with a whole bunch of people all over occasionally all over the globe, talking about kind of technology trends and interesting things that were happening in the world. And a few of those I was particularly interested in, to the point where I started to see these linkages in the way we run technology, coming together of a bunch of industry trends, things that maybe are even not so new, like domain-driven design, seeing a resurgence in popularity, and coming up quite a lot in conversations. And I started to develop in my head, only inside of my head, which is more of a hallucination than a vision, the grand unifying theory of software architecture. Kind of been wanting to write some of this down, but get distracted with doing actual work. And I sort of see all these things coming together. Domain-driven design, the DevOps movement, which is so many years old now, but it's still fundamentally at the core that idea that we devolve the responsibility for owning and running things to people who are out into the field instead of having centralized support. Microservices or more modular architecture. I was kind of involved quite a lot in the early sort of gold rush of microservices architecture, where we made lots of mistakes, cut things up too finely, and got all the boundaries wrong. And I'm very sorry for all of that. Cloud and platform engineering, event-driven architectures, and more recently things around team topologies and how better rich language about how we describe the interactions of teams and how they work together, and giving those things names. And I wrote some material about around platforms and the dynamics of platforms and how they operate in organizations, and that was kind of helpful too. But I see these things, there's a bunch of things here, and there's more that are reinforcing forces. They're coming together to help us create this leap forward, I think, that we see in organizations. And it's not new, but I kind of don't think anyone's really talking about how all these things interplay. One aspect of this that I've been really interested in has been, and for a number of years, has been this idea of Conway's Law. I don't probably need to introduce that. We've all sort of been talking about it for so long, but that idea that your team structures and the communication pathways in your organization really have this impact on how your architecture fractures apart and how productive you can make your systems for making changes and supporting them. We have actually, while I was at my previous employer, we talked about the reverse Conway maneuver. And I worked with some clients who are literally changing their org structure and then watching the very painful process of the architecture following the org structure. A very expensive way to achieve that sort of change, and you're not doing it deliberately, but very effective. Those social dynamics that make Conway's Law a thing. I've been thinking about those as as types of strong and weak forces that exist in organizations, and how we can understand those and recognize them and use them to good effect to how we manage a technology estate, develop products, and manage our estate. Talks from me are usually sort of a random kind of meander through a bunch of unrelated topics, and sometimes I can pull it together or not, but you might not see, you'll see the jumps. I'll talk a little bit about MYOB. I was surprised to find out that it's more than 30 years old, and possibly some people in kind of every room I talk to are probably, have worked at MYOB in its past 30 years. I know heaps and heaps of people in the industry who've been there before me and contributed. When MYOB was launched, I was in high school, and there's not that many product companies where kind of it has that long and rich history. I remember visiting MYOB in 2010 to talk to them about continuous delivery. Delivering products more, doing more frequent deployments and that. And the people looked at me and said, "We ship a box with a CD-ROM in it once a year." What are you talking about? But joining MYOB and looking inside, it's like looking inside the TARDIS. It's actually a lot bigger on the inside than I ever expected. There's much more product breadth and differing market sectors and then kind of layers of different shared capability in the organization that I wasn't aware of just how large and how complex the product suite and all the technology is to manage. So it's been an absolute hoot and a privilege to be part of the team. I don't know if I described my role as actually head of architecture. Recently, I annexed data, and so now I'm the head of data and architecture, and have the data platforms and data science as well in my remit. But as head of architecture, I get to do the big thinking about how everything fits together and how we're going to improve the way we deliver. Where am I going? Okay, long history. A lot of very smart people have been building product in MYOB for quite some time, and recently we've moved. It made a huge difference in moving from predominantly desktop products to completely subscription-based SaaS products, with browser interfaces and fully API-driven, all the modern stuff. We still do sell desktop products, but not very much. And MYOB is positioned very well to be a much broader set of capability to run a business. It's not just accounting software, but it's actually all sorts of aspects of running a business, from payroll to staff onboarding to CRM and project management. Not just like you're doing your accounting and doing your reporting and taxes. And some of that's happened by acquiring or building different capabilities, different products, and working to integrate them into sort of like this seamless idea that you have this one-stop shop and you work on all these different things. What that means is that across the organization, we're now, where you might have had a product that was servicing a particular need and it had very little integration with the rest of MYOB products, we're now seeing a much more integrated approach, just a force that we're dealing with that's meaning that we need to be able to work across the organization much more effectively. This is a picture that I've drawn numerous times around tech governance. And MYOB, like a lot of digital companies in the last few years, probably biased a lot more towards the left. Lots of autonomous teams building independent products, largely given a lot of accountability and responsibility for making technology choices and choosing sometimes entirely different technology stacks, approaches, everything like that. I've seen in numerous, my consulting time, sort of numerous companies, this gold rush of microservices and autonomous teams, all pulling in different directions. MYOB is probably not the worst I've ever seen, but it definitely creates this friction where there's a lot of differing standards, differing approaches across the organization. As we try to work more consistently across the organization, and do a lot more essentially product integration, this is causing us some friction. We need to address it. We need to improve. We don't want to be all the way to the right, which is where a lot of my kind of corporate clients used to be, which is, you will use Java, you will use Java 1.2 for the rest of your life. You will use these standards. You will follow, use our one central API gateway to do everything. I could go on, but that really constraining, killing innovation, sapping the autonomy out of teams. We don't want to go all the way to the right, but we need to shift a little bit to the right. We need to be able to create this kind of productive standards and consistency. And the trick of all this is, like, where do we focus our standardization, and where do we? Because we can't change everything, and we don't want to standardize everywhere. But is there anywhere in our way of thinking about MYOB that helps us make choices around where is it better to be aligned and where is it okay to be different? To tell the story, I probably need to explain a little bit more, like open the box of MYOB. Explain a little bit about how we're organized, because it's very much a sort of a organizational social dynamic kind of view of things. The first construct I want to introduce is what at MYOB is called a domain. I'm aware I'm in front of an audience that are very interested in domain-driven design. Just be gentle. I have read Eric Evans' book. It was probably 2007. I've read a lot of stuff since. But I have some familiarity in that area. But in the way that we think about the organization, our domains are our building blocks of capability. So business capabilities, if you like. I'll kind of talk a little bit more about our tiering of capability. But they are what we provide, what we build our products out of, and how we run our business. So it's a grouping of product, business, or technical business capabilities. They're related, they're cohesive, they form, they're related in terms of data or process or user bases, bunch of reasons why we might group them together to form a cohesive function. And in terms of domain-driven design, like these domains do form a domain. In that sense, they are a bounded context where we have a ubiquitous language, and it all makes it's reasonably consistent internally. Actually, it's not really, but that's the intent. That's the idea, is that we're able to give a team or an area ownership of this area, and to simplify and to deeply understand their domain, their business users, their business and product kind of peers, and develop that domain. I'll come to some examples that might illustrate what I mean. But then we construct we compose our domains up into bigger groups, bigger grouping elements. One of the most prominent is our product verticals, which represent our different customer segments, from mid-sized enterprises down to sole traders and individual small businesses. And so domains are roughly grouped into those types of domains, product vertical. But there are 3 tiers in the way that we talk about it. There's the product capabilities, the product domains exist at the top of our business. In the middle, we have our customer and business capability. So traditional, like shared capability stuff, how we manage customers. CRM is one domain, purchasing, billing, customer self-service. They sit there, and then our technology capabilities at the bottom of this diagram are things like being able to host applications and deploy them and monitor them, and the usual kind of internal technology platforms. And they roughly break down into this product tiers and platform, and the products are in our verticals. Yeah, typical kind of any large organization, but the domains sort of sit mapped into that. Examples for the product capabilities: we have an employer's domain, has all the product features that deal with payroll, onboarding, dealing with superannuation. We have tax, we have inventory, we have payments. In the middle end, we have CRM, we have billing, like I said, we have identity, customer self-service. We have our data platform, data science kind of capabilities. At the bottom, we have our hosting, observability, security. You get that kind of idea. Reality is that they're not so neatly segmented like this. They're actually quite, for reasons they smear, and but I'm an architect, so I get to draw the nice crisp boxes that make them look really tidy. But the reality is they're a bit more messy than that. We have teams that are assigned to run those domains, and in that post DevOps, you build it, you run it. We call it build it, own it, run it. Those teams are assigned long-term to be able to continue the development, do all the maintenance for all the systems and all the capability, own the data products, and product managers will be there working on the roadmap for those capabilities. So our organization is capability first, and then the teams map onto that. But it's a long that mirroring of our org structure to these domain boundaries. So I mentioned the strong and weak forces. I'll dive into that a little bit. Within a team, we have a team that sit together every day. They're doing work together. They go to the same stand-ups. They do planning together. They're very short communication pathways. They can quickly negotiate any differences in design or functional boundary or anything that's going on. They usually work together, even on a single task will be within that team. That's a very strong force of alignment. It's very easy to get kind of to overcome any kind of differences of opinion. In our world, teams within a domain have still quite strong, generally under one common leadership, product managers, engineering managers. We have a common understanding of our domain model and the language that we use to describe those things, where it's, or even where that's headed if it's becoming simpler, and we're doing the work to improve that. We have common rituals. It's easy to get that feedback loop. Still quite a strong force of kind of feeling of us to working on something together. The further you get out, and we have domains that may be within a vertical or one of our platform areas, it's much harder. It kind of incrementally just jumps up. Harder to get aligned on deliveries, schedules if you need to do work separately. Sometimes we can bring people together to swarm on a problem and try to sort of cut through that, but it's not. You can't do that at scale. So we more often we need to coordinate, negotiate, agree upfront, implement, integrate. It's just the reality of scaled up delivery. And then when we get to all of MYOB, those forces just are completely weak. And if you go further and we go through our public APIs to our developer community, that's like the weakest force. So like, I publish something on the internet, and I can't tell people how to use it, kind of apart from through documentation and changes. So we have the slowest, strongest forces at that team level, and then the weakest when we get up to all of MYOB. So what? So what does this all mean? I'm going to give a couple of examples. When we talk about the way we integrate systems, the way we integrate products or flow data or any of these things, we have different rules and different approaches that apply at each level. And we talk to teams around what is the scope of this integration, and how much do you want to invest in making it resilient and backward compatible, all these sort of things. So I do talk to the teams, and we do talk about within a domain boundary. We've got systems where it's probably the same team working on both ends of any connecting these things together. If it goes pop in the night, you're going to be the same team that's on call. You can kind of go and fix it. You can quickly and easily find that root cause. You're not going to be there's not going to be any of the Telstra salute, the kind of like pointing across the organisation saying it's your fault, because we are one unit. So we actually talk about productive coupling. This idea that actually putting in place lots of like indirection and raising the standard has a lower payoff within that domain boundary. It's not to say there's not good ideas to do decoupling. It's just we might be better investing in that somewhere else if we have to make a trade-off decision. And sometimes we can favour sort of synchronous communication, the request response style over eventing or eventual consistency or flowing data around, because the impact of that is much lower in that context quite often. And then when we zoom out, we go, okay, between domains, that's where we put up our higher standards around what we publish as a domain API, long-lived, attention to documentation, attention to schema published, version control, visible observability, visible change logs, so you're considering that to be the front door to your product internally, where you're exposing an API. And so we've been maturing that approach. We've been very clear that at the boundary of the domain, that's part of the kind of like interface to your area. And often that leads to finding those areas where we want to be more resilient, favour patterns that allow for a more resilient system, eventing, eventual consistency, replication of data sometimes to help with those kind of problems. We'd look at that at the domain boundaries because that makes more sense. When we get to the zoom out to all of MYOB, we're dealing with those much weaker forces of alignment, much more need to publish something and standardize it and also support it for a long time. Talking to one of our platform teams down in the red box, just to simplify it, who's dealing with identity. Identity is being used really broadly across all of our product suite, and they need to make a change to a protocol, change to an API endpoint. They have almost no hope at all of coordinating everybody to make a change to adopt that new protocol or endpoint. And so you pretty much have to treat those APIs once they're published and widely consumed by the organization as being forever, like as if they're public at the scale, the number of teams that we're talking about, which is not Google, but it's not also a small startup. So yeah, we line up our strong to weak, to guide where we focus our efforts around informing our decisions around interface design. Another big topic for me is making architectural decisions or technology decisions, choosing technologies, choosing approaches, things like that. And at an organization like this, where we've been all the way over on the left, I do what I want, introducing kind of technology governance. I don't want to say that word, but it's actually it's kind of a bit of a challenge, but it's a little bit countercultural. But what we observe is that sometimes it's not clear for teams how you make a decision. But this feels like an important decision. Who do I talk to? Who makes the decision? Who's the approver? How long should I take to make the decision? How much should I document all the trade-offs and options? What if there's someone who doesn't agree? Do I have to care? And what that leads to underinvestment in making important decisions sometimes, and we end up with this kind of accidental complexity that comes from having chosen something that could have been the same as something else, and overinvestment in some cases where people just go, I'm too scared, I'm just going to wait weeks and weeks and weeks until it's too late, and then I'll commit to the decision. Perfectly natural. Like I've done those things myself in organizations where it's been unclear. So we've been introducing, I mean, we have the classic kind of DAISY what Atlassian has, you've got a driver and you've got people you need to inform, and then you've got people who are responsible for the decision, sure. But using our strong and weak forces in our domain model, we've actually given some guidance on how to classify a decision and work out like how far do I have to invest in making this decision. So we call them type A, B, C. Type A is kind of this. The impact of this is largely going to impact the systems and teams that are in my domain, maybe a couple of other parties, but relatively reversible. Not a huge cost investment. Type B in between, and type C is like, yeah, we make this change, we're going to be requiring everybody to get on board, and everybody's going to have to make changes eventually. Big like hosting platform decisions, things like that. Philosophically, we want to push decision making as far as it can into the people who are owning the outcome of that decision, as close to the work as possible. And we also want to limit the times where you have to go and seek approval, but actually want to surface dissent. Like, that won't work. That's useful information, as opposed to kind of trying to bring it to a board to say yes or no, which is usually going to end in no. So our decision scaling gives us a sense, for cheap, low-risk things, there are particular forums you can go to, and particular kind of like level of ceremony to go to, and then a level in the organization that's a decider. It sounds really kind of like corporate hierarchy, but it actually is really enabling to say, this is an example of a thing. We can just make that decision. It's kind of, and we're going to run with it. And you can shorten that down to a few minutes or a couple of hours for things that some people were spending days on. So so far that's been really helpful. We also think about the dynamics and the forces in our organization, in order to try to think about ways to compensate for them, because we still broadly want to have a little bit more alignment. We want to be able to have, there's a whole bunch of benefits if we generally can share good ideas and have them used, even if it's for people to be able to move around in the organization and have some familiarity and be able to share and be more productive, for us to make more use of the things that we've got that are good, and reduce the amount of time that people are sort of spending on wasteful innovation, and just more focus that time on good innovation. So we do a few things. None of them will be particularly surprising to you, but we'll talk a little bit about them. No surprise, I was part of the group that put the ThoughtWorks Tech Radar together for quite a long time. At MYOB, we also produce our internal Tech Radar that talks about, and we get groups from right across the organization representing all the verticals and different parts of the organization, vertically and horizontally. And we talk about what we're experimenting with, and we share it, and we publish it, and we do internal talks about them, all associated with this Tech Radar process, which happens twice a year. And this is the lightweight governance around things. If you wanted to use something that we had in hold or retire, then I would like to hear about it. I want to know why. I'm not saying like absolutely no, never, but it's kind of a prompter. We have some guides to say you probably should have a conversation. Probably should have a solution options, which is like kind of criteria-based selection that says why you're doing that, and capture an ADR about it. Equally, we have guidance on things that you're assessing and trialing, how to kind of stop them from spreading suddenly like wildfire until we actually got some information about it. So we put a lot into this to try to be engaging across the organization. We also have the technology defaults. Default being sort of that starting point. It's not like you have to use this, but if you don't know any better, then do no worse than this kind of thing. Like make use of this, probably to the point of I'm gently encouraging teams, if you're not using this, you need to justify why, because these are things we've invested in. We've got all the organizational support behind them. We've got, in some cases, our platform teams are built around creating, like improving these things over time and making them easier to adopt. We kind of consider them to be the no regrets option, but if they don't fit in your world and you know why, then don't use them. That's fine. This is also really good for when people come to our organization. You can say, like, here, have a look at our defaults. It'll tell you what kind of tech organization we are. And they're all quite modern kind of options and quite productive. We don't have much that's junk lying around. Got lots of problems, but not with those choices. These evolve with our tech radar as well. So we will get that group across the organization to say, yeah, look, that's gone so far into adopt, so widely used, so well supported. This is actually, we consider that to be a default. And we also developed our engineering handbook, which is a kind of engineering and architecture handbook. We call it the Codex at MYOB. We had lots of little pockets of information, all in different confluence spaces, mostly treated by like, three-quarters of the organization would say, that's a nice opinion coming from that part of the organization, but we do things differently, and we're unique and special over here in XYZ. And so there was no trustworthy kind of like genuinely peer-reviewed organizational opinion. It was completely tribal, like, and no real way to know what was authoritative or not. And so that creates a lot of confusion. It kind of really, it doesn't have any of the benefits you have around sharing good practices. So again, we have a different group that across the organization that put this material together. It's things like software delivery practices, test-driven development, refactoring. It's all core engineering practices and architectural decisioning and security practices. Our security standards are all part of the codex and guidance on how to use them. And it has these levels of guidance. So from a suggestion, like, this is just useful material that you might like to take some inspiration from, to default, which I said before is like, yeah, do this or do something at least as good, please, to standard, which is like, we have very few standards, like real standards. They're like, we do this everywhere. There's a few in security and privacy that are really important. And it's fully inner sourced. We do it all in GitHub, pull requests, kind of peer review, and then we run kind of information sessions around what's in there. So, 12 months since we did the first 1.0 release, and it's actually kind of really been building in its usefulness across the organization. And it means that anybody who, we talk about those weak forces of alignment, someone from one of our product divisions that's based out of Christchurch, we have a conversation with a platform services billing domain in Melbourne. They can at least use some of the same common language that we even describe in Codex, and that's just been really useful. And it's the worst sketch in the whole thing, but we've also, when I came across from consulting into a product organization of this size, I realized that information doesn't travel very freely through an organization. It's really weird. I didn't, talk about siloing, but it's really visible when you're at this scale. A lot of information travels up and down through managers, and not so much travels horizontally. And so counteracting that weak force kind of requires a lot of energy being put in to creating communities of practice, creating technical leadership groups. We've got kind of like SRE groups and architecture groups and things like that. The communities of practice generally that create that connection and common language between people who are across the organization. They shorten the path to find out information. So it kind of creates this counteracting force. Only a few of the hard bits of running this. Our systems don't match the domain boundaries. They're classic, yes, sometimes because they're old, and weren't designed in the time when we had clarity around where those domain boundaries should be. And that's certainly true for some of our core products, and they won't be changed neatly, kind of like the return on investment of carving them up into neat service boundaries won't always be there. And so we have to work around that. We have to be cognizant of that and think about it, but we also have to work out how to collaborate on those shared systems. And if anyone's ever worked on things like Salesforce or even now HubSpot, is the new darling, those SaaS products that vendors sell to to us to run things like sales and support processes. They're not modular at all. So marketing operations in the domain and CRM as a domain, the system underneath it is all just one big contiguous data model. So we're working against that force all the time. So it's a little bit ugly. Most of the time, that's about just being aware and designing processes at the system level to deal with that. Another thing that's hard for us is sometimes you need to work across these domain boundaries to get things done. That domain coordinating backlog alignment, getting work to happen at the same time is not near impossible for everything you want to do. And sometimes you need to make minor changes. And we run inner source approaches that allow for code contribution across domains. You have a valuable outcome you want to do, you kind of need to make those changes, you can make pull requests into other people's codes. It'd be nice if some of these things were nicely industrialized and had a nice kind of clean extension interface, and you could configure them via APIs or config files, but you can't. Sometimes we need to make core code changes across those boundaries. But sometimes kind of if we go too far into that, we over-rely on code contribution across domains, then we end up in a very bad place where teams are essentially at war over pull requests through text, that sort of thing. I haven't seen that so bad at MYOB as I've seen it in some other places, but it happens. It creates this tension. The other is that our domains have changed. Even in the time I've been there, our understanding of our domain model improves over time. And sometimes those boundaries shift in the way we think about those things. We introduce new things, but we also sometimes change boundaries. And sometimes this is a real challenge for us right now, is we sometimes change those boundaries for the wrong reason. We change them because our investment priorities go somewhere else, our team shapes change size, and everyone thinks the domain is the team, not the capability. And so they go, oh, well, we need to shrink this team. Well, we combine these two domains. But hang on. The domains haven't changed. The domains are still what we do, and if I'd be a little bit rude, we build accounting software, we probably do the same thing in 20 years' time. So why would you change the domains just because we need to shift the way that teams are assigned? So we're doing some work on that now to improve the stability of those domains, because they're our boundary. They're where we hang a whole bunch of knowledge management. It affects everything through to like how we align AWS account boundaries and access control. And so if we keep on fracturing them and changing them, then we keep on creating more technical debt that we have to pay off. So it's a real challenge for me at the moment. I'm saying I'm working with the organisation on, but even in the time I've been there, we've improved and they're much more clear. I think the thing I've been kind of yelling down the corridors when I'm in the office is the domain is not the department. It's actually a capability shape thing. You happen to then use it to assign teams to. Abstract concepts, but this summary doesn't really make sense anymore, but I'm going to read it anyway. Like, the tech governance thing, it's kind of, we're absolutely not wanting to go to one size fits all, but we want to use our domain model to drive speed and innovation within the domain and standardization for how we connect them together and create products. We want those long-lived domains that are stable so we can consolidate, we can kind of put all of our governance decision-making, move as much kind of control down to those domains, and we compensate for those weak forces, like I said, through a whole bunch of stuff that's deliberately designed to say, let's for some things, let's act as MYOB, not as your own little area. Cool. That's all I've got. And I didn't cough once. Any questions?
I suppose one thing where you mentioned that model where you had for weak to strong teams and the distribution of decision making across those teams and across those domains. You spoke about two guiding principles in those. One was technology defaults. So that probably aligns to what your standards are to choose the tools or the technology of choice. And the other one suppose if I sort of get it right, was sorry, I probably forgot that. I think the question in that was, how do you then govern, suppose compliance, security, those sort of aspects of decision making, so that at the end of the day, the decision is still complied to a standard that you need the team. Sorry, you had the tech radar and the technology difference. Both of them talk to the technology that you're trying to choose. It doesn't talk to either a standard or a compliance model or a framework or whatever. So how do you make sure that the teams who are making those decisions from the week, they ultimately bubble up to the same ethos of what you're trying to achieve, going away from tools to more security models or compliance models and so on?
Yeah. So
Sorry,
I will. Yeah. Yeah. So I think there was a lot in there. I'm not going to repeat all of it. I think you were steering me towards thinking about things like security, privacy, like things that are the hard rules, the standards, and less about technology choices, which probably are a little bit softer in their governance kind of. In terms of security and privacy, we have a security framework, a privacy framework. We have information security standards, and we have audit that runs internally. And so, like many organizations, we have a part of the organization that goes through and does audit. We're ISO standard compliant as well, which we have to meet. So where the standards apply, we do audit, and people have to kind of put in place control plans to rectify anything that's not there. For the things that are softer, so the choices, like the defaults, they're not a standard. What we have is a solution design process, kind of lightweight solution design process. If you knew me from the last few years, you'd laugh at me using the word governance and architects and all these sort of things. I was always the guy who said architecture without architects. Now I'm the head of architecture. What was my point? We have a solution design process which encourages you to present for anything that's a significant design change in your system to the right forum you're presenting that. We're relying on people's engagement in the defaults process in the tech radar for them to flag, and to kind of highlight where things could be done more in compliance with our defaults. And so it's very, very federated and very lightweight in terms of governance, in terms of those technology choices, patterns, and things like that. But wherever we have standards, it's enforced.
So the follow-up is, the technology debts, then are these managed at the individual teams level making those choices, or are you still managing the tech debts at an organization level?
The question was, is tech debts, are they like the level of tech debt, is that managed at the domain level or at the organizational level? The accountability, we have a concept of technical system owner, quite common TSO. It's pretty, that's at the domain level. And so security vulnerabilities that we detect through all of our scanning and kind of repository scanning, kind of active AWS scanning, they flow into Nucleus. That report then goes to the TSO, so at the domain level, and they're responsible for that. Tech debt is managed at the domain level, not always the best, but that's where that accountability sits. And then there is a kind of like a leadership structure above that, segment leads and things like that. But that idea that having a plan, knowing the state of your systems in terms of health, deliverability, reliability, and security, that's devolved to each one of the domain leaders.
I have potentially a twofold question. I'll try to keep it one-fold. As you go through all these process changes, are you measuring, and are there any metrics that you're picking to try and measure if they're successful or not? Or is it the teams are working better? I'm just curious how you say, yeah, this is correct, or that we scrap this process and try again.
The different So how do we measure success of any of this stuff to try to increase our kind of common view of technology and how it runs.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably the best example is the Tech Radar and the Codex, which are sort of run by different groups, because I like these kind of to develop people. They give them an opportunity to lead something. Like there's separate groups that run them, to a point. Yeah, they're putting in place measures mostly at the moment of leading indications of engagement with the content.
Right.
But what I'd like to get to is that we shorten decision times.
Yeah.
So in our when a architectural decision needs to be made, that we could, either qualitatively or genuinely quantitatively look at. It actually took us less time because we were able to instead of having a debate about something, we just went, well, here's the guidance in the Codex.
Yeah.
We're not quite there yet. I don't think we could measure it, and there are many other factors that would be there, but that's the one that's kind of leading in my head. That's for those things. That's what I want to see, is that people can just get on with the work,
yeah,
and less debate the things that don't matter so much.
Maybe a question I've got. So you talked a bit about the compensating for workforce, if I've got this right, because around the Codex and the Tech Radar process you do. And one thing around the Tech Radar, and we do some of that internally as well. One thing I like about it is that you maybe you completely start from scratch, but if you have a chance to refresh it every 6 months, 12 months, whatever time you do it, and you just focus on the blips, what we want to focus on this time around. Is there a danger with the Codex that doesn't happen and sort of gets something sort of gets a bit stale and hard to evolve? I guess I'm curious to know how you'll. I think it's fairly new at the moment. I'm just curious to know how you'll sort of keep that fresh, spruce it up, throw out stuff that's relevant anymore. Any thoughts on how you'll do that?
Yeah, so the question was around the Codex, which is like an engineering handbook, so it's a publication, and how do we keep it fresh, and how do we stop it from getting stale? Because we've all gone to organisations and gone, oh yeah, there's all this stuff here, and it's kind of it was written in 2012. And, we have a leadership team that's kind of it's about 3 or 4 people who are from across the organisation, and they have 2 working groups, one on adoption and one on content freshness, and thus far. They have I think they're aiming for quarterly releases. We've done 2. And so that's a sort of a top to tail kind of what's the, gather some feedback, focus generally on some new content mixed with a little bit of updates. I think the first cut was probably picking some stuff that was non-controversial and wasn't gonna, like, they're probably pretty obvious, and people will get used to the idea, oh, well, that's written down here, that makes sense. I can get in behind that. We're introducing things like firmer stance on pair programming, the benefits of pair programming, which depending on which of the different kind of parts of our organisation would actually be something they haven't adopted very much. And we're actually saying that it's actually a default. You should be using it. Here's the guidance on how to use it. Yeah, that's so we are introducing fresh things slower than I would like, but that's the intent. Definitely set it up with the idea of a quarterly release cycle, release notes, and some events around that.
How are you enforcing things? Is it like because you've got the 2 lines of you do this or you go do what you want to do. So you publish the Codex. How are you getting adoption in that? Like as you bring up these new processes and trying to get your teams to adopt them.
Lots and lots of communication. How are we getting adoption of things that may be new, that may be different to the way that people do them now? Lots and lots of communication, and lots and lots of influence through partly my position in the organisation, and being able to kind of demonstrate good results, showcasing where things have been working well in the organisation and getting people to talk about them. We do a lot of internal panel discussions and things like that are like experience reports and things like that. But it's very much an influence thing rather than a thou shalt. Apart from the real guardrails, those standards, they're much more firmly pushed. So it's a bit of
How do you encourage people contribute to Codex? Like people are busy with their development work already. Obviously, spare time to contribute to that. How do you encourage people?
Yeah, the question is, how do you encourage people to contribute to something like the Codex? It's the perennial problem that people will drift in to be able to be really passionate about it and to carve out time to do it, to do that kind of writing, and sometimes they move out. And I think that gardening that kind of group, like keeping on kind of attracting people who, while they've got an interest or a particular pet thing, they can come and contribute. Then we have a core group that for the last 18 months have been really, really good. I think being realistic about pace is helping. It's a long game, not a short game. And this, what I do is when people sign up to be part of, particularly the Tech Radar, which is a bigger investment, it's like short but quite intense workshopping kind of thing. It's like, you set this as one of your goals with your people leader. You can be a contributor, like you can throw in a pull request and everything like that. But if you're part of the core working groups, that's actually work, and you set that as you need to agree that with your engineering manager, whoever your line people leader is, and get it into your kind of quarterly OKRs, and so that you'll make time for it.
We have 2 questions from people on the live stream. So the first one is, you talked in terms of multiple domains. Do each of these domains contain its set of bounded contexts, or were you using domain as a synonym for bounded context?
Yeah, so the question was, in the domains that I'm talking about, are there bounded contexts within, multiple bounded contexts within, or am I saying they're synonymous? This was the danger that I'll get tomatoes thrown at me in front of a group of domain-driven design experts. I don't really know. I think of like the bounded context as being a characteristic of a boundary, and there might be multiple bounded contexts within a domain, or it might be one within which the domain model is kind of coherent. I don't really have a strong answer. It depends. If you go and have a look, we've probably got some domains for which they've got legacy systems with quite differing, and like billing will have the old billing store and the new billing store, old and new, and literally, and they have different models, and they have boundaries around them that require a bit of translation. But I'll get the jargon wrong if I try to talk the DDD stuff.
Fair enough. The other question on the chat is, are you in the process of converting a monolith to microservices? Or, and if so, what is the conversion strategy that you're using?
Yeah. Are we on the journey to convert a monolith to microservices? We're actually in some kind of. I wouldn't say microservices, depending on what size you're thinking of when you're thinking about microservices. I did a lot of work with James Lewis. He was kind of around that time that he was publishing that thing, and the kind of like tiny little services that all talk to each other are kind of like, where a single kind of Lambda is a service isn't probably what I had in my head. It was more around a context-sized kind of service boundary. We will probably take incrementally over a long time, we will start to split the most actively developed part of the one big major product monolith that we have. But I don't see there's no planned roadmap to break it apart completely. And partly because of the usual problems with the strategic, like moving to microservices, is a lot of coupling at the data layer.
I have a question about so previously you mentioned about the default stack. So how often do you usually review those options with like the fast change of the technology? And that when it's come to real time, is like a group decision, or how do you decide?
The question was where the defaults will get refreshed, because there's new technology coming in, and things will need to be retired, and how do we go about doing that? In 18 months that we published the Tech Radar and the tech defaults, we haven't changed any. We haven't removed anything from the defaults. So by the nature of the fact that it's default, it's like something that we're calling a pretty safe bet for a long time. And we're encouraging people to say, use it as a default, get on board with it. And so at some stage, we'll have a new contender, something which we'll need to play that trade-off and say, actually, we might move that, our hosting platform, Jupyter, which is in Kubernetes, either it will internally change to be something more modern, in which case Jupyter will still be, or we might actually say we don't want to use that anymore, we don't see the value. I'm not predicting that. Anybody who's listening, Jupyter's great. But if that was the case, then yeah, we would signal that a long way ahead that that's starting to move into towards the hold category in our tech radar. We're considering it. In terms of those decisions, it's not a democracy. They're a group of advisors who come up with a strategy around, like, where we want to place everything. But it's that then feeds into our technology leadership team under Darren, under the CTO. And so ultimately it'll probably require a few different kind of passes if we were going to say actually end of life on one of those things. Probably too much detail, but it's kind of like a crowdsourced, then filtered by really smart technical leaders who come up with a positioning, and then we do have a good look at it at the leadership team level to make sure we're not sending a signal that would be expensive and not great for the organisation.
I wanted to ask the following: how complicated or complex is really your domain work? It seems from this presentation and the previous one, the domains are fairly large. How much attention do you pay to getting the model right, specifically as architects? Does it matter, or what are the consequences other than the snip?
Yeah.
Can I add on to that question? Yeah. The same question I had was, how long did you guys spend in defining the models, or rather, what was the process? Was there a trial and error process to defining the model? I think it's sort of talks to both.
Yeah. So how did we go about defining those models? How much attention have we paid? How much refinement? What process has that gone through? Predates me. The major domains, particularly in our middle end of our organisation, all the business and customer capabilities, they're probably 5 or 6 years old, and they have changed. The boundaries have changed a little bit here and there through refinement. So we're talking about the boundary of the domain rather than necessarily the individual elements of the model, which change much more frequently, and even there'll be multiple models, conflicting models sometimes inside of the boundary. So there's a rate of change. I think what I was saying before, we've seen some change in the last year where it's been around changing the size and shape of the organisation. Has, like, people have changed those boundaries to reflect the team structure rather than like the changing team shape and size, without enough consideration of actually the separation of those domains. And if you could just unwind, you would say actually there's like six distinct domains being managed by one team, not one team, which is where we've probably seen the most change. Those refinements are kind of, I'm trying to get a little bit more kind of control and consultation around them now so that I can steer them a bit.
You sort of articulated at one point that you were not happy with the team to sort of changing the domain based on the team. Rather, you would have sort of looked at based on capabilities as a domain. Is that your guiding principle of how you have evolved the definition of domains?
Yes. So the answer was like, am I trying to instill the idea that we think capability first and then map the teams to the domains? And yes, that's exactly what I'm doing to reduce the confusion around some of the structure. Lots of organizations are trying to do this, right? It's just, your Spotify model where a tribe really takes care of a particular area of capability and the team lives for a long time with it. And lots of organizations are organizationally aligning their team structure to the capabilities and platforms. But I also see these problems like of continuous reorg, creating lots and lots of tech debt happening in organizations that go that way. So just trying to create a bit of a counterforce to that. Oh, I'm sorry.
Just trying to understand. Sorry. So this organization structure that you have, or rather, let's see one of the diagrams you had on that slide, but you had shown domains, and then you had also shown a monolith which comes across multiple domains, right? So how did you get about the problem of things that had already been there in the past,
Mhm.
and now you have to structure domains around it? What I'm trying to get at is there would have been enough of stuff already done and written. So there you have identified one monolith which is spread across multiple domains. But then how do you successfully say that this is one domain and we structure our teams around this? Because teams would have been structured even before you were in MYOB or even before that. So how do you get around the problem of let's structure this now, and from now on let's follow this new model? How do you do that? You have to do a lot of restructuring. That's probably what I'm trying to ask.
Yeah, I guess the question is, how do you get to a point where you have independent or domain-oriented teams
Yeah.
that work across existing monolithic system? Part of that was a significant restructure. Like a lot of organizations like this, you have minor little kind of fracture events, like little seismic shocks every now and then through the organization. Everything kind of shifts around and shuffles. But there was a more significant restructure into this domain model, probably a year, 18 months before I came to MYOB.
So
And-
the domains already identified.
Yeah. And some of those have shifted around a little bit to be particularly around this monolith. One of the things there is that even where the system, the code, and even like the database model that sits underneath that system is shared, and sometimes even some shared concepts that are like shared tables and things like that are managed. The domain isn't just like the technology. The domain is also the product leader who is thinking about that product fit in market and the evolution of features in that area. So there's quite a lot of work that's beyond that still can be thought of in the team's identity and their depth of understanding of those features, but then they have to collaborate and coordinate where they hit the system. I don't know whether I'm adding anything to the understanding, but there's still a kind of, people ask me, maybe we should be shaped around the system shape, but I actually think when we start to think about product and feature roadmap and teams' domain knowledge, shaping to the domain has significant benefit, even if they're still working in a shared code base.
Is there a difference between team function versus team's domain?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
Is there a difference between a team's function versus a team's domain? Because try and sort of traditionally teams get sort of structured around say a development team, a qualification team, or a product team, or functions of those teams.
Okay.
Versus you're talking about domains which are designed around capabilities. So let's say my product has 10 capabilities, which means I need the same sort of people to probably do product governance, or feature development, and quality assurance, deployment, build, manage, operate, everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
So question really is there a difference, fundamental difference between team's function versus team's domain?
Okay.
And then how do you manage that force of one saying, this is my area of concern, versus going, I need to look at the whole domain, and
Mhm.
I could be interacting with a product guy, but he's my team because it's in the domain.
Okay.
How does
Yeah,
that
like
work?
the kind of questions around the function, as in like my craft function. I'm a software developer, I'm a software tester, I'm a product manager, versus domain, which is around flow of value to a customer,
Right.
or either it's internal or external. We're getting into the kind of like some detail about MYOB that you might have to come and work at MYOB and find out about it. But we operate on a Helix model, so which is, you can go and read the PDF if you like, but it's just another way of saying matrix management with a bit of a twist. Everyone belongs to a function. And I belong to the product and technology function, but in these domains we come together with people from go-to-market, marketing, product, data science, through to sales support. Anyone who needs to be engaged in delivery of that capability will be working to, this is like where you do the work as opposed to where you develop your craft. Biased heavily towards the what we call the verticals, which is the delivery of product to vertical, product to customer segment, and the all of the financial goals, sales, all those sort of things are at the vertical level. So it tends to be a strong alignment factor towards the vertical. People probably think mostly they work in a vertical. Oh yeah, I also work for this function. Did that help?
That answers enough.
Yeah. Thank you very much.